All right, so I hit the go live button early by accident. I got about 5 minutes until the meeting actually starts. So bear with me. I apologize. I just hit many buttons, and you guys got on early than I wanted. So there'll be a little bit dead time in there, and I apologize for that. But we are going to be doing our study committee on independent oversight commission meeting tonight, November 23rd, 2020. And it's a big agenda item. We got a lot of things we'll be talking about, and it's going to be action packed. And I'll repeat that again once we get a little bit closer for the other platforms. It's taking forever to open that email up. So finally, there it is. I ran out of time, Diane. I get a chance to actually read that thing about what was told to us with that.
So I had checked the iCompass calendar and not the main calendar. I didn't realize that there were two calendars. So after I found that out, I emailed you to let you know that there was only a 1 o'clock meeting on December 7th. And that the evening was free. But let me go check it again right now because you never know. That was 2 weeks ago.
Sure. Just
so hang on.
And I do also already have the reservation on the Zoom calendar for the 7th.
Yeah. Oh, you do?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks.
Good evening. We are about to go at it for the study committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting 11/23/2020. We got a big, huge agenda item going on. Thank you for joining. Hope that information is going to be helpful, and the topics that we cover will be plentiful. Hang in there for us. Diane, are you going to remind us about the location, remote, whatever spiel that is? Thank you.
Okay, Chuck, are you ready for me to turn things on?
I am. Thank you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening. Welcome. This is the Study Committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting November 23rd, 2020. Welcome all that have joined us this evening. Could you please do roll call?
Sade Colwood. Oh, first, sorry. Remember that when you say your name, you have to say your name and then say attending virtually from wherever you're coming from. Sorry about that. Sade Colwood. You're muted, hon.
Present. I'm virtually attending from Douglas, Massachusetts.
Noel Garcia Jr.
Present. I'm virtually attending from East Lansing, Michigan.
Chuck Grigsby.
East Lansing, Michigan, Eaton County, present. Chuck Grigsby.
Cedric Haro.
Present, attending virtually from Mason, Michigan, Ingham County.
Helen Josephson.
Virtually attending from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Sharon Reed Davis. Chris Root.
Present. I'm attending virtually from East Lansing and Ingham County.
Quentin Tyler.
Present, attending from Lexington, Kentucky.
Ooh. Eric Williams.
Oh, I'm here in East Lansing.
Tanya Williams.
Virtually attending from DeWitt, Clinton County.
Ron Bacon. He was here. Okay. Kelly Ellsworth Etchison has let us know that she's unable to attend. So that's everyone.
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate that. If someone does pop in and I don't actually see them, can you let us know? And so we can recognize them, get them officially on the roll call. All right, so let's move to item 1.2, approval agenda, 11/23/20. Before we go into that, I just would like to possibly make an amendment to the agenda today to add item 3.2 regards to discussion of the December and future meetings. We kind of left that open-ended, and I should have had that on the agenda for us this evening. I was wondering if anyone would want to entertain that motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Williams, seconded by Commissioner Root. Is there any discussion on adding that amendment? Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. So moved. So we'll add to that to item 3.2, future meeting going forward. I just got just a couple of different things before we hit to the next item, just a couple of housekeeping things. When you want to make a motion or before you speak, please identify yourself and raise your hand on the motions. That would be very helpful for me as far as being able to recognize you appropriately. It seemed like I was calling the same people every single time on the previous meeting, so I want to kind of get that cleaned up. And then also, tonight's agenda is really action-packed, as you probably all have seen. So I just want to get you guys to understand there are a lot of questions. With the length of time that we have and that is appropriate, we might not get to every single question you may have, but we will maybe come up with something in a way that we can still get those questions asked and addressed and have them going forward in our next meeting. So please don't get apprehensive about that, and please ask as many questions you want, but I just kind of want to get that in the back of your head in regards to this meeting, because we do have a lot of content with what we're going to be doing tonight. All right, so moving on to item 1.3, approval of the minutes of November 9th, 2020. I'll entertain a motion if there's no amendments or changes to those minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Williams. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Josephson that I saw. She raised her hand as I've asked nicely to do, so I can see you. Appreciate that. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of November 9th, 2020 of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you.
It looks like Ron is back on if you want to acknowledge him.
Thank you. Councilmember Bacon, could you please identify where you're calling from remotely, please? Acknowledge your presence.
Yep, present. East Lansing, Michigan, Clinton County.
Thank you, Councilmember Bacon, for that. All right, we are now to item 1.4, written communications. We have quite a bit underneath there, so I'll just start with the line items. Everyone's got a chance to see the written communication. Agency profiles. Is there any comments, questions, feedback to those particular written comments that were submitted to us? Yes, please, Commissioner Williams.
I'd like to say that once I started reading those profiles, I noticed they were substantially out of date. If you want to rely on them, you better do some checking. They're like 6, 7 years old.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. And as we do know, with some of these oversight commissions that we've been researching, things do change quite a bit once they are up and running, as far as them really being functional. I just, from that, I looked at, most of them, and I recognized it looks like Eugene, Oregon's information. And, there were some things in there that I thought, were comparable to maybe something that will incorporate similarities. Don't get me wrong, these are similarities to maybe some of the things will be incorporated with our report overall. So outside of that, the other ones seem like they weren't very specific to some of the things that we would be concerned about. All right, moving on. Goals for establishment of Police Oversight Commission, HORO, written communication. You have any comments or reactions to that, Commissioner Hall? You want to say anything to those goals that you submitted?
No, they're pretty self-explanatory. I would entertain any comments, but nothing to add.
I just would like to ask you a quick question. And if you don't have an answer or whatnot, I was just curious. When you go down to specific recommendation for goals of the oversight body, when you talk about investigate individual complaints of alleged police misconduct, maybe parallel to the internal investigation. I just had a quick question. Were you thinking that when you talk about parallel investigation, was that at the same time or after the internal investigation is completed, or did you get that far in your thought process?
To be honest, I haven't thought about whether that would be concurrent or subsequent. I know there are some procedures in which, particularly for appellate bodies, where if the complainant feels unsatisfied with the internal affairs investigation, they would ask for the civilian oversight body to review that investigation. So that's certainly a possibility, but I hadn't really had either way in mind.
Understood. The reason why I ask is because a lot of, and I think including ours, that there is no release of any information at all until that internal investigation is completed and there's been a determination. And that obviously sometimes is a challenge when it comes to some of the community members seeking questions. And then my final question to that point is, when you're talking about doing an investigation, were you thinking that that investigation process should include case reports, police reports, and video footage within that?
Certainly anything which is legally permissible to get to the civilian oversight body. I think we'll probably get into it a little bit later today, but there are increasing calls for full subpoena power for civilian oversight bodies. So I think that's definitely a possibility.
Thank you. That's all I had. We'll move on if anyone didn't have anything else to that. Thank you for submitting that. I appreciate that. It's going to be some good stuff we'll definitely be probably using down the road along with the other commissioners who have submitted their information. All right, goals for establishment of police oversight, use of force incidents weekly arrest report. This was submitted and it was very enlightening for me to be able to see, a period of time, substantial period of time of kind of how some things there. Did anyone have any reactions or comments in regards to the use of force incidents weekly arrest reports that was submitted? Yes, Commissioner Harrell.
I just had a few questions. So first, in the use of force code column, I was curious as to why there would be an NA, a not applicable, for the use of force code, and yet still have this incident included in the use of force report. Whether that was, a misclassification or something along those lines. And similar to that, I was wondering if either Deputy Chief Gonzalez or Chief Johnson could speak to, for example, the incident on July 14th, where there was no charged offense, but a firearm was displayed. So I understand there are any numerous reasons why that might occur. If they could just sort of give some idea of what some of those reasons were.
Deputy Chief Gonzalez or Chief Johnson, you care to respond?
Yeah, so I can't speak to the NA just because this document wasn't filed by us, so I don't know why that was noted as NA in that force code column. However, to speak to the firearm display, but there may not be a charge associated with that. Anytime an officer displays their firearm, unholsters their firearm, or takes a long gun out of the vehicle, out of their patrol vehicle, they're required to complete a use of force report. So, there's any number of scenarios where an arrest may not be made. Just to give you two kind of offhand scenarios, one may be where an officer is doing a building search. Let's say we go on an alarm, find a potentially broken into building, and they clear the building. They're going to have their firearms out during that procedure. So if they don't find anybody, there may not be an arrest. There will be an arrest associated with that. Also, I can speak to, let's say, and this is a real incident that occurred just recently, were requested as mutual aid in another agency's jurisdiction. There was a weapons complaint. Our officers had their weapons out while they responded to that situation, but the other jurisdiction actually handled the enforcement of the criminal weapons. So that's why you may see weapons displayed without arrest charges associated.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Gonzalez. Commissioner Root.
I can speak to those three cases where it says NA in the use of force code. There's a little note right at the top. This was compiled by East Lansing Info, and I asked them if I could share it with the study committee, so I'm pretty familiar with it. The reason it says NA is that this was an incident that did not have a use of force code in the weekly report. It was the incident at the 7-Eleven where there was a special, investigation. There was a presentation made to council. It was discussed as a use of force incident. It was in the case report that it was use of force. And I don't know why it wasn't in the weekly arrest report, which was the source for this spreadsheet. So I was the person, or actually I wasn't, but Eli put in that NA. And that happens to be, there's a note at the top, and that's the only place where something was added where there wasn't use of force recorded in the weekly report because it became evident from other information.
Thank you, Commissioner Root, for that insight. Yes, Commissioner Harrell and I believe Vice Chair Williams raised their hand. No, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if we could hear from the department why, given that obviously became such a high-profile incident, why there was no initial use of force code in that report.
Yeah, that's something that I'll get into in my presentation, but it speaks to what everybody's been about over the past several weeks of having an early warning system or a use of force tracking system in place. The reporting system that we have right now, the SRMS system run by the state, when we generate reports, it pulls data from different sections of the system. So when an officer submits a police report, let's say tonight I go out and I make a disorderly conduct arrest and I have to use pepper spray during the arrest. In my police report, if I don't put that force code or that file class pass that 4-digit code into the system. When I run that case and arrest, that weekly case and arrest summary, it's not going to pull it. But yet, if I still document my use of force, when I run a use of force report on my end through our dashboard, it can pull that out. So in the interim, what we've discussed is to run weekly audits to make sure that officers are including that 4-digit code. It's supposed to be caught at the initial supervisor level when they review it, but that doesn't always happen, obviously. So on our end, we're running weekly audits to make sure that things are being coded correctly. It's not a situation where the force is not being documented. It's a situation where it's just not being coded correctly. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Gonzalez. I know this is not your document, and you may probably address this a little bit later on, but is the other force classification where you're just doing the handcuffing, where you're just trying to get things understood, or does that mean multiple different things when you say other force?
Yeah, other force could be non-arrest handcuffing if someone is detained but not physically arrested and eventually released. And it could also be physical control. So if someone has to use a pressure point, or if someone has to use a technique called a wrist lock, that could be captured as other force as well.
And the wrist lock and all that, the pressure point, that's different from the PPCT, or that's kind of the same classification?
It's in the same vein. So what we're working with, and I mean, I think we all know this, we have an imperfect system. Hopefully we can get to a system where, and I'll speak to it again during my presentation, we have a system that is a lot more detailed and a lot more, when it comes to use of force, a lot more dedicated to tracking, to be able to pull the right data that we share with you.
Yes, thank you. And this is my last thing on this. So in this particular document, and I haven't seen your official one and how it's classified, but it seems like there's only most of the time just one use of force identified, and very rarely, more than one where you do a couple different things. Is there a particular reason for that, or is it just the circumstance of what we're looking at here, or how does that work with you guys submitting specific details? Is that part of what you want to improve upon as far as the stuff you talked about earlier?
That's one thing that we need to improve.
Okay.
One thing that we need to capture in our audits. But I also want to make a clear point that, so if in that disorderly arrest, I use a wrist lock and I use pepper spray. Okay? Those should be two file classes that go into the police report. But also when I do my report, I have to know that I use that physical control and I use that PCA in the actual police report. So when I pull the data out on a use of force report, that should show up. If I don't code it correctly, it's not going to show up correctly. So again, we're kind of going back around in a circle here. It really does come down to having a good dedicated system to capture this information, to capture it correctly. But also we have a human element here too, that garbage in, garbage out. We've got to make sure that we are inputting data properly. We also have to make sure that we are auditing it or reviewing it properly as it makes sense.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Gonzalez, and I really appreciate the acknowledgement of just kind of, we're not perfect, and we all can improve in everything. So I appreciate that comment. Anything else from anyone else in regards to the use of force weekly arrest reports that was submitted in written communication? All right, thank you. Let's move on to, we have goals to achieve by Commissioner Root that was submitted. Thank you, Commissioner Root. Did anyone have any reactions, comments, or anything you wanted to highlight, Commissioner Root, in regards to your goals? I have one little thing to ask you about. On item 7, you indicated the Oversight Commission should consistently and in a timely manner receive information from ELPD that is legally allowed to obtain. Are you familiar with where I'm talking about, Commissioner Root? My question is, Did you have an idea or thought process about what you thought would be timely in regards to that submission? Any thoughts on that at all?
I don't know the best answer.
Okay.
What I'm getting at here is I think it would be incredibly valuable if a certain type of data and a certain time frame could be decided on and could be counted on. Because there's been a lot of stress and conflict and loss of time debating those issues sometimes in this community and other communities. And I know, for example, in Chicago recently, for particularly serious incidents after the Laquan McDonald shooting, there was a decision made that within 60 days, 8 things would be provided. It wasn't about all complaints, it was about a particular group. And I looked at that and I thought, oh my goodness, that would be really helpful. So that's where that idea came from, in addition to experience, that if we didn't have to negotiate each time and wonder each time, think about what to ask for each time and wonder what will happen if we ask for it each time, relationships would be better, the process would be better. That's what's on my mind.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. And when you think it's appropriate, do you mind sharing those recommendations of the 8 things?
From Chicago? Sure.
Yeah, just for us to kind of get a perspective on what types of 8 things those are.
Happy to do that.
I really appreciate that. Any other comments, reactions to written communication by Commissioner Root? All right, moving to item 1.5, pursuant to MCL 15263, subsection 1, limiting public comment to 5 minutes per individual participation today. I'll entertain a motion to enforce that item 1.5 in today's meeting. So with no reaction, I'm assuming that for item 1.5, no one has a problem with a time limit today on public comment. Is that what I'm understanding?
I'll move it for discussion. If we don't move it, we have no time limit.
Correct.
Which probably is not what we're intending given our practice.
So moved by Commissioner Root. Is there a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Williamson in regards to that. And that's exactly what we did last week. We had that long pause until someone stepped up with that. So in regards to this item here, all those who are in favor of that item, limiting the public comment to 5 minutes, if there's no more discussion on that or amendments, please say aye. Any opposed? So move. So item 1.5 will have public comment limiting to it for 5 minutes, not our usual 3. And please, if we do have any callers, don't forget to remind them of the 30-second mark so they have where they're at with their comments. Do we have anyone on the line for communication from audience for item 2, Justin?
Thank you, Chuck. We do not have any callers in the queue for public comment at this time.
All right. All right, moving on to item number 3, new business 3.1, draft outline study committee reports to city council, subgroup 2 memo draft report outline 1120 that was submitted. Would anyone from that group like to talk about this document under new business?
I agreed to give a little summary, and Sade is going to fill in with comments, and Noel is welcome to do so too. This is the group that Sade originally suggested, thinking that it would be very beneficial if we early on think about the sections of the report. And that one thing that would allow us to do is not have to leave all of the report to the very end to write. That it would enable us to write some sections earlier on. So we just set ourselves the task, and we met on Friday, of coming up with an outline that would be a draft, so that we could have some kind of idea of what we thought we would want to produce in response to the council's request of us to make them a report with our recommendations. So we thought of a pretty simple structure. Section 1 would be brief on the purpose, just so you've got everything in that one place with the resolution and the history of the study committee itself. Section 2 would be background about what has happened in East Lansing and what is happening now that is relevant to oversight. And some more detail of that might be in an appendix, but we thought it was important to have some in the body of the report before people get to the recommendations. Number 3 is national and national context about other people, other cities, oversight commissions, and also legal and union context in Michigan and, with the police unions here in East Lansing. And then number 4 is the meat and potatoes of actual recommendation. And there's lots of different sections, and that came from looking at the NACOL guidebook as a beginning, and then just going through ordinances from a couple of cities, looking at what's, how they're structured, what sections they have. And then some appendices and references. So that what seemed to us was that sections 1, 2, and 3 probably don't need to wait until the end. Section 4 certainly does, because you can't write section, it's very important not to deliberate to a decision outside the full study committee. So the study committee would need to make its decisions about the recommendations for an oversight commission that would be explained in section 4. So section 4 would be written right at the end, but that some of the other 3 sections, we're not ready to write all of them now, but they could be written earlier. And it did seem to us that section 1 about the purpose of the study committee could, for the most part, be written, could at least get started soon. So we wanted to bring this to you for your consideration, and thought that if we could agree that this is a general outline, not that, we can't make changes as we go, but if this was a general outline, and that maybe we could agree specifically to section 1 and ask somebody to do the draft, then we could sort of model how we think we can move forward with this report.
Thank you, Commissioner Root.
Or Noel, do you have any comments?
I think we also decided that the entire group needed to make a group decision on this outline as a final report, and had some discussion as to, is our final report going to look like a city ordinance proposal, policy proposal? Well, the 3 of us met, we felt this is the best way to handle the reporting, but we don't want to go any further unless we have a group consensus. I shouldn't say we don't want to go any further. I think we owe it to everybody that we have a group consensus on how we move forward with this report.
Understood. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, so I'll just echo what's already been said. I think the other thing is, initially when I looked at the first kind of iteration of the draft, I was like, oh, this is a lot. But one of the things that we were also thinking about is, one, leaving little to no room for questions about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the decisions that we're making, by providing rationale, by providing legitimate and concrete examples, so that if there are questions that arise, we have some case studies that can be referred to only further support what we're doing here. The other thing that came up was for the Police Oversight Committee to be able to use some of this report as their foundation. So we are already taking 6 months to kind of get this started. So imagine throwing a whole new group together, and they're going to also need time to get started. So this is one kind of way to build a foundation for them. So with information and resources that they can also rely on, these are things that also they can feel free to modify and change as they see fit. But this will also help them in the work that they will ultimately be doing. As we can already see, like 6 months for them to start and actually see change, it's going to take a while. So we thought that the more information that we can have, the better it will be going forward. So that's what you see that we presented here today.
Thank you, commissioners, for that explanation. Does any commissioners have any upfront questions in regards to what they see in regards to what they have offered in their presentation? I just had one question, maybe two. I'm looking at section 2, history and current practices of oversight of police in East Lansing. And I'm not familiar with Ordinance 1463, establishing a public safety review board. It sounds very familiar for some reason. I can't wrap my head around it. Does anyone know or can speak to that by chance? Yes, Commissioner Root.
The history of reports to the Human Relations Commission is kind of intertwined with this Ordinance 1463, because there had been discussion over years in the HRC about how can it be more effective with the annual reports from ELPD, and also an awareness that the HRC had no authority to do anything with the information they received. And so over time, the idea came up that wouldn't it be better to have a structure created that actually had a role in relationship to complaints. So some work was done to draft what became Ordinance 1463. It's a very brief ordinance. I'll attach it to written comments for our next meeting, so it becomes something that everybody will have access to. It's only a complaint review board. And when that was brought forward to council, the HRC was asked to give a look at it and give comments to council. And actually, that's where this study committee came from, because there was a number of people came to the HRC and said, people in the community weren't involved in drafting this, and it has a number of weaknesses, and it would be better to try to start over again to write an ordinance. And lo and behold, we are now trying to work toward drafting a new ordinance. So I'll attach that to the written comments.
Thank you. I remember coming into the HRC, and they were on the tail end of that, and I remember going through that process. So that's why that sticks out to me for some crazy reason. But thank you. We will definitely appreciate looking at that and just kind of seeing how to improve that, make that stronger, or not go back to something that's not going to be sufficient enough for the community's standpoint and what they expect from the Oversight Commission. So thank you. Any other questions, comments in regards to the overall material or information that's been submitted? I understand. So if I understand, the subgroup's goal is to make a decision on incorporating, due to the lack of time and the time that it takes and not doing this towards the end, all that kind of stuff. You want to consider making a decision on items 1, 2, and 3. Is that how I understand it, or am I confused on that?
What we were thinking was if we could get either a decision or a consensus about this, the overall approach, not necessarily line by line, but, is this a good working document? And if so, if we could agree to section 1 to get started. And then we could see if somebody would like to draft it. So that's how we were thinking about the decision making.
Is anyone opposed to looking at section 1 and using that as the basis of how we formulate this going forward? I mean, if anyone has anything better or something they could add to it, or some input, I like what I see personally, but I'm interested to hear if anyone has anything else to add to that.
Question. Are we talking about the idea of section 1, or are we talking about the content of section 1? That this is what section 1 will include? Is that what you mean, or do you mean the actual a draft of section 1?
Well, sections 1, 2, and 3 aren't going to have any recommendations. So I think they can be drafted when we're ready, and people can make additions. If the person who's drafting it, when we choose somebody to draft it, you can send comments to them, or their draft can be added to. We're trying to find a way. Another part of the suggestion about this approach is so we don't have to spend a whole lot of time in the full group. But if you've got a specific suggestion, you don't need to be shy.
No, I noticed that section 1 says present recommendations. So
that's as the purpose.
Yeah. So you're not going to go beyond that.
The recommendations are section 4.
Oh, okay.
The content of the recommendations.
So the purpose of this enterprise
is to present recommendations.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's fine.
It's pretty darn obvious, but it's important to have it there so people can see it.
Okay. I can't object to the obvious.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Tyler, is that you? Yes, sir.
Just a comment that I appreciate the framework, and I think it provides an excellent roadmap in moving forward.
I would agree with you 1,000%. Any other comments? Is there any possible motions in regards to what you guys like and want to make a decision on by chance? Yes, Commissioner Harrell, please. You're muted.
Motion to accept the draft outline as proposed by the subcommittee regarding sections 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So moved. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Tyler. In regards to that approval of sections 1, 2, and 3 as an outline proposal.
He did all 4.
Oh, you did all 4. Excuse me. I apologize. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Seconded by Commissioner Tyler. Is there any more discussion on the motion? All those in favor of approving the motion for items 1, 2, 3, and 4 submitted by the subgroup in regards to the outline, all say aye with your hands, please. Any opposed? So moved. So we'll be incorporating that one.
We were suggesting that we might see if somebody wants to draft section 1, which we see as pretty brief. And we can't include the input from the community. There's some input from the community already, but obviously not a lot. But if somebody would like to start that, that would move us forward.
She's speaking to our writers on the
full study committee should make the decisions about who the drafters are for the different sections. We thought that was important enough to bring to the full group.
Understood. Is there anyone who is interested in drafting that section? We need the writers. We need the writers on to step up for us here. People who
the shortest section.
Who because we've incorporated, so we're going to be committed to it until things change. So I'm looking for at least 1 or 2 volunteers, maybe to work in tandem, possibly. Just briefly. Thank you, Commissioner Tyler, for stepping up. Is anyone else interested in the Section 1 drafting item and working with Commissioner Tyler?
Just one quick question. I know one of the questions that came up for us was drafting and revising the report without violating Open Meetings Act. What does that look like for folks who are going to be working on actually writing the report piece of things? Do we have an idea?
I don't have a clear idea, but I do know when you are editing and revising it, I don't see how that is a violation in regards to writing a report. But that's what my understanding is. Can anyone else jump in and add to that from their understanding as far as that concern? Yeah, I didn't think so. So does that help you out, Commissioner Callwood?
Yeah.
We're good to go. And it would be appropriate if you're sitting at home and you thought of something that you want to give to Commissioner Tyler. You certainly can do that. And if you want to be official, you can send it to Diane, and Diane can disseminate it for you as well, so you stay clear with everything when it comes to that. If anyone does choose to do an input on that, that fair?
One thing I want to stress about that is don't respond everybody to it and then have back and forth dialogue. So if Commissioner Callwood sends a page out and says, "This is my draft," before a meeting, and then people start responding to it before the meeting, that's a problem. But if it's one-way communication from Commissioner Callwood saying, "This is my draft for you guys to review, we can discuss it at the meeting," that's okay. But people shouldn't start sending emails to each other and keep responding back and forth. So as long as you don't report that.
Thank you for that clarification, City Manager Lahanas. Did you have something to say, Commissioner Root?
Just a follow-up question to what George said. If I said to Quentin, I'd be happy to look at your draft, can we do that?
Look, if it stays in a group that's not a quorum,
fine.
Then that's my understanding.
Okay, that's helpful clarification. It's also true that I'd be willing to look at a draft.
I
think we're making good progress.
We know that all too well, Commissioner Root. All right, so as far as the item 1, I think we got that kind of understood. Are we going to be talking or doing anything with 2 or 3 or 4 right now at this moment, and how we're going about that? We're going to leave that alone right now? Okay, I just want to make sure I understand what you guys want to do or don't want to do. All right, so we all done with item 3.1, or is there anything more that we wanted to talk about in regards to that?
I think I think one of the things that we do have to talk about later on is just the December schedule. So having a timeline for Commissioner Tyler to also work on as well, and something that's realistic. And so I guess once we figure out when the next meeting is, perhaps that's when we can have somewhat of a draft, or the meeting after. I'm just kind of not sure again, so we can kind of keep the ball rolling. But I'm not sure how we can decide that.
Yes, and just reminder to commissioners, when you do speak, just please state who you are. So for minutes and all that kind of stuff, I hate to be a stickler on that. I try to recognize everyone when they do talk, Commissioner Callwood, but just, out of habit. But yes, I think we're on the same page, because that's going to be our discussion, item 3.2, that I added to the agenda to get some clarification on timelines and December and things like that. So I think we're on the same page with that. Before we move on, are we good with 3.1? All right, so let's move on to item 3.2.
Excuse me, Chuck.
Yes.
We did have somebody that was unable to join right away because they had difficulty finding the meeting ID, but we do have somebody who is interested in public comment if the committee would choose to hear that.
So I'll leave that up to the committee. I know we have quite a bit, but we also know how valuable it is to have input, and we haven't had much. So I think any input we can get is important, but that's up to you. So I would by raising hands, is anyone not okay with caller calling in and speaking for that allotted 5 minutes? So I think we're a go. Just I think we're a go. Just
Can I add to that? He's actually wanting to do public comment after the presentation on use of force. He doesn't really want to do public comment right now.
okay. So I think that would be a motion item then, if we wanted to change that structure. Am I correct with that, City Manager Lahanas, in regards to public comment in like that?
I mean, typically, you would have to change your agenda to allow someone to sort of have a comment after the item because it comes at the beginning of the meeting. But that's up to, I mean, you could always comment at the next public meeting about what came last time. So
Understood. I just want to be sensitive to the Zoom limitations and just, sometimes people can't call in, they're getting in. And, I just really, not to disagree with you just in regards to why that's important, but just with being accommodating with just the challenge of our format would be the only thing I'd say to that. But so
just control the timing of your comments to have it sequence in a certain meeting should be at the pleasure of this commission, and not someone shouldn't just jump in and change your meeting schedule for you. But that's up to the commission.
Understood. And so the question is to the commission, I would just like to open it up just for a quick, 10, 15 second discussion about what you're interested in doing with the caller. Yes, Commissioner Williams.
In the interest of facilitating public comment, which is not nearly reached the point of being disruptive at this point, I would move to allow this.
Is there a second to Commissioner Williams' a motion to allow the caller to call in after the presentations? Seconded by Commissioner Josephson. Any more discussion on that motion? All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, motion passes. So we'll add that public comment. Sorry, here, let me get caught up in my agenda here. So that would be item 4.3, public comments. Is that correct? How you see it, Justin?
Yes, I can prepare for public comment after the two presentations.
Thank you. So we'll add in that 4.3 for the motion that was just passed. All right. Thank you for that clarification. All right. So we are now, I believe, at item 3.2, and we're going to be talking in regards to kind of like our meetings going forward in December and timelines that Commissioner Callwood brought up. I would like to open it up to, first off, to City Manager Lahanas about kind of really what our options are possibly with next month. I know you're going to get back to us and let us know what our parameters were. And I know Diane was looking at it as well.
I thought we had the one date. I don't know if we had other dates available, but Diane and Justin can tell us that. Did we have other dates besides the one Monday? Because we already have a one Monday set, right?
Yeah, so our regular meeting is on the 14th, and we were proposing doing another meeting on the 7th. And I looked at both calendars, and the only other meeting on the 7th is at 1 o'clock during the day.
And for additional confirmation, I do have a reservation on the city's Zoom calendar already for both the 7th and the 14th.
For 6 o'clock?
So we can meet on the 7th as well, if that's the pleasure of the group.
Correct. All right, so let's talk about that for a quick second. I know a couple of commissioners will not be able to attend. I think it was Commissioner Callwood and maybe one other person possibly. Outside of that, is there anyone else that has where that's just a bad date when it comes to maybe possibly meeting on the 7th? Okay. All right. So, so as I understand it, we have the option, guys and gals, for making a motion for having an additional meeting added on the 7th of December 2020 for our subgroup. Yes, City Manager Lahanas.
just a quick caution is I would plan in advance what you want to see at those meetings, because if on the 7th you ask for stuff, it will not be possible typically to get information because we want it posted by Wednesday. So that gives a day turnaround for staff. So if there's any presentations or anything like that, or if that meeting's for a particular purpose, I would lay that out now, because we may not be able to accommodate such a tight turnaround, obviously, with a day turnaround.
Thank you, City Manager Lahanas. Yes, Vice Chair Williams, and then I believe Commissioner Callwood.
Yes, Vice Chair Williams here. I do recall earlier we had talked about making one of these meetings in December a really an open forum for public speaking, again, for the comments. Is that something that's still on the table, or has this changed a little bit?
I believe it was open. And this is my own personal view of it. It seems like right now, with where we're at and what we're working on, and it's kind of, I think it's hard for the public to really weigh in on something that we haven't really got to a certain point. And so for me, I was thinking possibly of looking at that kind of format a little bit later on after December, but that's just my anticipation that we've had so far. But again, I'm very interested to hear what other people have to say in regards to that. You're muted, Mrs. Hardy. Oh, okay, you was okay. Any other input on that to Commissioner or Vice Chair Williams's question? Yes, Commissioner Root, you're muted.
Just very quickly, December 14 is no other meeting shows up on the city calendar, but there is a major meeting of the school board that probably you could expect 100 people to be at. So that was one reason that we thought it would be a really bad idea to have a public input session on that particular day.
How does everyone feel about getting the maximum participation from the community as early as December? Do you feel that, do you agree with me? Do you disagree, in regards to that concern, and possibly have a little bit more for them to comment on in our process? Yes, Vice Chair Williams, and then Commissioner Tyler.
I do agree with you in the regards that we should have more information for them to be able to have a thorough interaction between us.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Tyler. Okay. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So when we talk about separate from that, the 7th, what do we, going back to City Manager Lahanas' concern about getting turnaround time and what do we want to get done at that meeting? I'm curious to hear from you about what we are going to have this extra meeting that we didn't have planned before, and what you want to get done and who you want to see possibly do it. Yes, Commissioner Harrell.
My understanding from last meeting had been that because there was so much to talk about, we were going to spend today on use of force, and then the next meeting was going to be discussing the complaint system process. So that's what I was anticipating for December 7th.
And thank you for reminding me of that. That's exactly what I was thinking as well, because we had kind of really committed to that with the commitments from staff in doing the presentation. So is everyone kind of in agreement with that tentative plan? That's what we kind of really want to focus on, is that presentation from them and focusing on complaints and the history of complaints and all that kind of stuff and that topic? Does anyone disagree with that, to say?
You're supposed to clarify what you want the 14th then, because we would have brought the presentation to the 14th instead. So what would you do on the 14th? Because once you get to the 7th, we won't have time likely to prepare anything for the 14th. So you may have to give us 2 weeks of what you want to see. So, and I'm asking generally here, City Manager Lahanas and Deputy Chief and Chief, what do you tell us in regards to the presentation that we're looking for in December and the time that we're at now in 7th or the 14th? How are you looking at that being appropriate to your other commitments and presenting to us? How does that work for you? I'd ask the Chief that.
I think the Deputy Chief mentioned that he could be ready on the 7th. It's a possibility. So, that's a 2-week turnaround, but I think we got notified a couple weeks ago, reference some things on the agenda. So I think the deputy chief was putting some stuff together, both these back-to-back presentations. So I think we could be ready for the 7th.
So our primary focus will be that, and the presentation and our discussion and the information will be that for the 7th, from what I understand. And then going to the second part of that on the 14th, I know that a couple of commissioners kind of had some people in mind, kind of wanted to have some things done by that time. Can I get some input about what you would like to see or what you're interested in focusing on the 14th of December meeting? Which is really important for us to kind of really have an idea because of the turnaround time, because of that meeting happening. Then we have holidays and we'll have a gap of time. So I really would like to hopefully that meeting to really have a lot of stuff for us to walk away with, to come back with substantial amount of research work or focus when it comes to that. Commissioner Harrell.
Yeah, sorry. If I go back to the tentative work plan from a few meetings ago, what we had for the 21st, which I assume would now be the 14th, was presentations from Black Lives Matter and the Community Mental Health Association of Michigan. So if those are still possibilities, if those are things that the rest of the committee thinks are appropriate for that time, I don't know how much we would get in terms of product, workable content out of those meetings, but that might represent an avenue for us to start getting different forms of community input, at the very least, if not from the overall public, from some important stakeholders in the community.
Couldn't agree with you more. I thank you for referring back to that. That's helpful. I really like the community health aspect and really trying to get some learnings from that and understandings. I know, for example, our department has incorporated, some mental health aspects to what they want to do going forward, and understanding that would be helpful, I think. And I know Commissioner Williams had talked about maybe some things within that realm as well. For me personally, as much as I appreciate Black Lives Matter and what they bring to the table, I feel like, just like the public comment, I feel like we're not quite there yet to ask them what we want to know from them in regards to kind of really making it beneficial to our conversation and discussion. But I think that's, just my personal view on it all when it comes to the order of presenters to the group. But I definitely am very interested in exploring the topics of the community health part that we had on that previous work plan. Any other comments in regards to that? Commissioner Root and Commissioner Garcia.
First.
I think it's important that we don't pick one or the other. I think we pick both. I mean, to hear from, and at this point, I know I understand the anxiety that we're not ready, but I think this commission, this oversight committee, was put together for transparency purposes and to hear the public, and we haven't really done that yet outside of 2 or 3 public comments. So I think we just need to open it up, and whether we're ready or not, and hear from the community. And I don't think we take one and not the other. I think we take them both.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia Jr. Any follow-up comments to that input? Yes, Commissioner Root.
Another possibility is going down that work plan that Ed referred to. Municipal liability insurer and MCOLs are also on the list, where we'd be mostly looking for input from them. They wouldn't be responding to things about our deliberations. And it is the middle of December, so it might be difficult to get somebody to make a commitment. So I think maybe we could, have a couple of folks as possibilities for that time and start to work on who'd be available on the 14th, understanding that we'd get to other people later.
Thank you, Commissioner Root. Yes, City Manager Lahanas.
Another thought was that it was mentioned by a commissioner during our first meeting, the possibility of looking at a public survey as a way of providing public input. So we've been sort of trying to gather information. We've got some information from Commissioner Harrell, and police department has been looking for stuff from the Department of Justice on public safety, sort of community, community feedback that you could have sort of broadly done by a phone survey. And that's something the city has a pretty strong interest in doing. So perhaps we can share our progress on that, hear your thoughts on that meeting, and talk. And looking at that as a way of providing broader public input, because we haven't gotten too much input so far. And you're right that maybe if you also get to respond to, public input could be more meaningful, but maybe looking at a community survey might be something that's worthwhile, because it was raised by the commission as well. And it's something we're also looking at and interested in as well.
Thank you, City Manager Lahanas. Can I just ask, so the community survey, and I know you said you're looking into it, how does that work with our involvement? Are we going to be a part of that process, and like what questions will be asked, or how's that working in your mind?
Yeah, that's certainly something we can share and hear your input, hear your feedback. We don't have a survey yet. We have some drafts of some. Like I said, it came up from Commissioner Garcia, and we asked Commissioner Hero because of his background in research methods. This is something I had a strong interest in because council had talked about the need to improve police community relations over time. And we've taken a lot of steps, this commission being one of them, but a lot of steps. And I wish we could have had a benchmark of our police community relations perceptions 6 months ago, but we don't. So could we do one now and then do one in 2 years and then do one 2 years later over time, so we can try to measure if we're able to move the dial on police community relations in an objective way. So hiring a firm, we've used Epic MRA in the past to do community surveys. They've been broad citywide surveys, not focusing only on public safety. This would be envisioned focusing on public safety. So certainly, I would like to hear your thoughts and input and feedback, and not do a survey from the city and then have you say, "I wish you would have looked at this one issue." Which would be a waste of money for our perspective. But like I said, we heard it from here as well. We asked Commissioner Hero because of his research background, and it seems like a good fit. Something we've already been talking about internally. It seems like a good fit to hear about it here, hear your feedback, look at the questions, see what your thoughts are on it. So maybe we can talk about that. And also, it's a good way to get public input by going out to people instead of having them come here. Maybe they're not coming here, but maybe we can go out and hear feedback from 400 residents that are cross section of the community. In the past, we've done these as a a sort of demographically and geographically diverse group by research methods people saying this is a valid survey of East Lansing's, temperature, so to speak. So that might be something we want to consider for that conversation.
I love it. So I think we have kind of a workable Commissioner, City Manager Lahanas. Yes, Councilman Bacon.
Yes, along the lines of what Chris was doing with the outline, with each, like George's new item here, kind of what would the Oversight Commission do with said survey, then feeds into the outline moving forward of where that fits into the plan, rather than is that going to be something that the actual seated commission is going to review, look at where we're at, and then present something for council? What do we do long term with that data? Would be a good question to answer along the way, and maybe that can be placed somewhere in that framework of where that happens and what goes on, so it doesn't just get lost in the sauce here. Duly noted. Appreciate that input. I'm sure the subgroup will take that into consideration. So from what I understand, we kind of really have it workable for the 7th and 14th. I just need to formulate the agenda and then converse, make sure that we're in alignment with that. Is that where we're at now with that? Okay. Any more discussion on item 3.2 in regards to our meetings going forward in the next, at least short term, and the structure of them? All right, thank you. Let's move on to item number 4, staff reports, city manager information on comparable cities. It looks like City Manager Lahanas has gave us a robust list to work with. Can you help us out with that?
Sure. So the first document is a lot of information, but I'll just sort of walk you through a little bit of it, and I'm not going to do a presentation because it's more just resources for you. But after last spring, I want you to sort of see what the state cities were Michigan and around the Big Ten. So I had sort of the research done I told you before that Public Act 312 is the Labor Relations Act of Michigan that provides for public safety for binding arbitration. So you have to set up comparable communities. So that list of comparable communities are communities that in the arbitration process were found to be comparable to East Lansing. That means that in some way the population, taxable value, were found to be relevant in the conversation about our labor agreements and through an arbitration process. So that doesn't mean that every city is exactly like East Lansing. Obviously, Ann Arbor and Lansing get pretty big, and Jackson gets a bit smaller. But they give you, when you look at a range of cities, it gives you sort of an estimate of what pay, benefits, and contracts should look like as it relates to public safety. So that's why I came up with that list of comparable cities. There's nothing magical to it. That's where the list came from. There's also Michigan State University thrown in there. That's because they're a nearby partner, obviously. They are not a comparable community because they're not a city. So when you look at the list, you'll see it. An interesting thing about this list is, and the next list as well I'll touch upon, is when you go by population from small to big, you'll see that their solutions to police oversight get larger when the department gets larger. They have more resources and therefore more oversight and probably greater expectations of oversight. So the next one I'll go to, you have to scroll down quite a ways to that chart with a really small print. And then you'll get to the Big 10 cities. It starts with College Park with 32,000, goes all the way up to Columbus with 879,000. And then again, it goes by population in order. Again, it's interesting because when you're at the smaller cities, you have very little in the form of police oversight. But as you get to the big cities, that's where you have more and more robust oversight. So interesting to you, perhaps because it shows a summary of what things look like. Then you go back to the actual policies. If you want to see a policy that I thought, we touched upon Ann Arbor before. Ann Arbor is a policy that when you read through it, it's 10 pages. It's not long. It's not even 10 pages. Maybe it's 8 pages. But it gives you a notion of some of the trade-offs and some of the considerations that went into putting that policy together, about the timing of the investigation, about the authority of the commission, about the review of confidential information, about how binding that sort of information, their recommendation is to the chief or to the city administrator. All of that stuff is weaved into the Ann Arbor policy. I'm not saying it's the right policy decisions for East Lansing or not, but I'm just saying as you read that document through, you will see all the things that we talk about touched upon through that policy document. So it's a good one to sort of look at and say, oh, this is how Ann Arbor is handling it. So again, not that you're going to take their exact policy, but all the things we touch upon, labor issues, the authority of the city charter and how this plays upon the city charter authority, all of those issues about does an officer need to speak to a commission, the review of evidence are all touched upon. So you're certainly welcome to read all of them. It's good information. If you were to read one, I would say Ann Arbor, just because it has lots of the sorts of things to touch upon that we've already talked about and that you've heard about. But I don't want to take too much time because Deputy Chief Gonzalez has a thorough presentation, but I just wanted to provide that to you. Like I said, this is information that I gathered because I thought it would be useful to sort of get a look at the landscape of Michigan cities and Big 10 cities to see what other cities do in regards to police review and oversight. That's all I've got unless anyone has any questions for me.
I don't see anyone having questions for you, City Manager Lahat.
I can't hear you, Chair.
Sorry, I was muted, so but I don't see anyone having any specific questions to the information. Thank you for compiling this. I do have a comment though. I got a chance to look at a good chunk of them, and I say this respectfully, but I see a lot of things of what not to do when it comes to what we would like to do here in East Lansing and how it's been set up. And I won't identify any cities or anything like that, but it definitely was helpful for me to go through some of that and just get a basic idea and understand kind of really what's going on around us and what may be working, what isn't working, and how these have changed over time. I'm curious to see. So thank you for that. I think we'll move on. Yes, Commissioner Williams.
I was part of that group that was working up some profiles of cities, and I spent all my time doing my little cities. And I haven't really looked too much at the cities that Mr. Lahanas did and Ms. Josephson. My experience going through this material is that each place is different, and it's kind of fascinating how these things develop and the little wrinkles that they all that they have. And you know, the NACO people tell us that there are 2 models or 3 models, and you have to pick a model. But I didn't see any models there. I saw individual cities with histories and different ways of skinning the cats that they had to skin. So I'd like to have some time to go through all these cities on all these lists and see it. And I would encourage others to do that, because these places are fascinating and they're all different. There ain't no models. There's just local conditions.
I couldn't agree with you more, Commissioner Williams. And my eyes were this big with some of the stuff that I was looking at, and just kind of how it got to that and what they decided. And so I would second the fact that if you get a chance, please go through that and take a good look at it. And we'd be interested to hear, what you think of it, hopefully in the next meeting or so, and some feedback on that. Anything else before we move on? All right. Item 4.2, East Lansing Police Department presentation on the use of force. And I'll open it up to Deputy Chief Gonzalez and Chief Johnson.
All right. Good evening again. Justin is going to share the screen and help me scroll through this. I am going to go through this and with an eye that there are going to be probably a lot of questions afterwards. So we have plenty of time to respond to questions for everybody. So we go to the next screen. So just some objectives with tonight's presentation. We're obviously going to talk about our standing response to resistance policy, some of the training with use of force that our officers undergo on an annual basis. We will talk about the MPOL's use of force continuum, or what they call the subject control continuum. That is a copy of the continuum attached to your agendas tonight for your review. We'll talk about use of force reporting procedures and review procedures. We talked a little bit about it earlier, some of the room for opportunity and areas where we need to improve in those reporting procedures. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well again. And then I'm going to talk about data and how we capture it, how we extract it from the system, and make some recommendations to you all where we see room for growth again as well. Next slide. So we'll talk about our policy. Our response to resistance policy is policy 20-12. That policy was also included in your agenda packets as well. It contains definitions, a couple of case law examples that are very germane and very specific to use of force. And this is United States Supreme Court case law that dictates how police officers can and cannot use force. We'll talk about non-deadly and deadly force. Again, documentation, medical treatment, some responsibilities of officers and the first line supervisors. We'll talk about weapons, and then training and assessment on those techniques that those officers have available to them. So, applicable case law. First, we're going to start way back with the Fourth Amendment. Because an arrest is a seizure, and therefore any use of force can be constituted as a seizure. So, an officer must establish probable cause to make an arrest. When I say probable cause, a lot of people say, well, what is that? What is the threshold of probable cause? It's more likely than not that the incident or the crime occurred. If you want a definition, that is a very general and widely used definition of probable cause. Next, we'll talk about two very specific cases that deal with use of force. Every police officer out there should be able to recite these almost by heart. The first one is Tennessee v. Garner. This case comes out of the United States Supreme Court, and it specifically talks about the use of deadly force. So officers may use deadly force against a violent offender if they pose a serious bodily threat or a deadly threat to officers or others. One of the things that Tennessee v. Garner did abolish was the use of deadly force against nonviolent felony offenders, and laid out this next term that an officer's use of deadly force is limited to those situations where the officer has probable cause again to believe that a felon poses a threat of serious physical harm to themselves or to the public. The next case, this one's Graham v. O'Connor, and this one really talks about the use of non-deadly force against the individual. But the big thing with Graham is that it laid out the objectively reasonable clause, meaning that any force used by a police officer has to be used and it has to be judged from an objectively reasonable standard. The tricky thing with this, and I'm the farthest thing from a lawyer, so please excuse my very basic explanation of this, is that the court stated that the reasonable test is not capable of a precise definition or mechanical application. What does that mean? So when you look at, how you put that definition or that statement into practice, Graham did lay out three very specific things that have to be considered by a police officer prior to force being used. One, the severity of the crime. Next, whether or not the suspect poses an immediate threat to officers or the public. And then the third one, which is probably the most common condition that officers encounter and have to make a determination on, is whether the suspect is actively resisting or attempting to. The next slide. We'll talk about deadly force within our policy and how it's laid out. So deadly force is authorized when an honest and reasonable belief that the use of deadly force is necessary to prevent imminent threat or imminent death or great bodily harm to oneself or another. What we have to be cognizant of when we talk about deadly force or even non-deadly force is that we are judging this from the officer's perspective at the time that the incident is occurring. The courts have said that the officer doesn't have the ability or the advantage of hindsight. So when judging whether or not use of force is justified, you have to look at it from the totality of the circumstances of when the incident occurred. Before using a firearm, an officer should attempt to identify themselves and, if feasible, state their intention to shoot. In practice, how does this work? On the range, our officers go through a bunch of different types of drills to become proficient with their firearms. And one of the drills that we brought is a challenge drill where the range instructor gives a command and the officers prior to shooting have to give a warning to simulate their warning the individual to stop, to drop their gun, whatever the direction may be, the officer has to shoot. Our policy does prohibit warning shots, so we do not shoot at somebody or something. We just give them a warning, scare them, if you will.